If you live in New York State and you think genocide is bad, here's some things you ought to do. You ought to learn about Break the Bonds. Break the Bonds is a grassroots campaign that's been going on in New York State for like 3 years now, trying to pressure New York State to stop using Israeli bonds as part of the way that it funds the New York State Retirement Fund. Okay, so what does that mean? Every year, New York State loans some of your tax money to the government of Israel. The Israeli government pays New York back in installments with a little bit of interest. New York then takes that little bit of interest and puts it into the big pot of money that it uses to pay the pensions of retired New York State employees. And it's not like this is the only way that New York State is funding its retirees' pensions. There's literally thousands of income streams going into that retirement fund. So the folks that Break the Bonds are saying like, hey, look, it would be very easy for you to figure out a different thing to do with that money. You could lend that money and charge that bit of interest to another country or another state or a New York State business for all we care, but just not the Israeli government, because we know what they're doing with that money. So you ought to go over to their link tree and read their links, get informed, get educated, understand more about the campaign and how it works. And while you're there, you definitely ought to sign Break the Bonds' petition. Break the Bonds is of particular interest to my family because my dad is a retired New York State employee. He was a forester with the DEC for like 30 years. And him and my mom are living off of his pension from New York State Retired Employees Fund. But also, my big sister is a New York State employee, and so is my little brother. So them two are going to be living off of a New York State funded retirement pension one day as well. You know, I'm not a finance whiz, but just off the top of my head, it would seem to me that lending money to a country whose prime minister is wanted by the ICJ, I don't know if you're going to see all that money again. Another thing you ought to do is go learn about SUNY BDS. This is another grassroots campaign that started in New York State a couple years ago that wants the SUNY system, the New York State public university system, to cut all of its ties with Israeli institutions, Israeli finance, Israeli universities. So you really ought to go over to their link tree as well and look at their resources, read some of their literature. There's a petition you can sign if you're a SUNY student or an alum or an employee, whatever. And they have a newsletter as well, so you can always sign up for that. Other thing you ought to do is talk to people about this stuff. Spread the word. I would be shocked, like absolutely shocked, if like 5% of New York State even knew that these campaigns were going on. So now that you know, you're kind of the person who has the responsibility to let more people know, right? Anybody who lives in New York State and pays taxes in New York State, Break the Bonds is about you. Anybody who like has any connection to the SUNY system, either you're an alum, a student, an employee, you're the family member of an alum, whatever, SUNY BDS has something to do with you. This is not going on somewhere else in some other dimension. This isn't, oh, wait for somebody bigger than me to sort things out. This is about you. What are you going to do?